So there's a couple of different ways to get your function to produce some sort of output. You should already be familiar with using console.log to print out messages to the console, which you can do inside a function or directly from the console, which is something we did way back in the very first lesson of this course. Now, if you remember all the way back to that lesson, when you first used console.log, then you might also remember seeing the word undefined displayed after your message. So the question is, what is undefined and where exactly is it coming from? Well, in reality, undefined is actually what is being returned back from the console.log function when you call it. You see, any function is always going to return some value back to the caller. If a return value is not specified, then the function will just return back undefined. When you call console.log and pass it a message, you are in effect calling the console.log function, passing in an argument, which is your message, and then it's returning back undefined. However, the function is also printing out the message back to the console. So the way to look at it is there's two different ways you can get your function to produce some sort of output. The first way is printing messages using console.log, and the second way is by using the return keyword and a value to return back some value to the caller. Two important things to point out here is that the return keyword will be used to stop the execution of a function, and it's going to return a value back to the caller. If nothing is defined as a value to be returned back, then undefined is going to be returned back automatically. Now, if that didn't make any sense, let's look at some code and hopefully it'll become a little more clear. Now, one thing to keep in mind as I do this is that console.log and return are not the same thing. So this example should show the key difference between the two. Alright, so I've got a function here that I've written to tell me if an integer greater than 2 is a prime number. Now, if you're not familiar with prime numbers, a number is basically prime if it can't be divided by any other numbers besides itself and 1. That's not a super formal definition for a prime number, but stay with me. The important thing here is that you see the difference between console.log and return. So the way this function works is if an integer passed to the function is a prime number, then it's going to return true. It's that simple. But if the number is not prime, then it will print to the console the first number that our integer that we're passing here is divisible by, and then it will return false. So again, don't worry too much about the details of this function, but I'm going to copy it and paste it over into the console, and then we'll run it and see what kind of output we get back. All right. So I know 11 is a prime number, so let's call our function and see what we get back. Okay, so I'll type is prime 11, and we get back true. Perfect, that's what we want to see. If you look at our function, that means when I passed 11 to it, that it started at the number 2 and went all the way to the number 10, because we're less than 11, so this loop would end at number 10, and it never found a number 11 was divisible by. So it never hit this conditional statement. It never got inside this conditional statement, and it just returned true, okay? Now let's try passing in another number. So how about 49? Because, 49 is an odd number. It's kind of weird, and I can't really remember if it's divisible by 7 or not. So, okay, cool. So it is divisible by 7, and we get the return value of false. Again, if you look at our function, that means when I passed 49 to it, that we started at 2 and looped until 7, and when the loop reached 7, our condition finally evaluated to true. So once that happened, it printed 49 is divisible by 7 to the console, and then it returned false. Now the key thing here is that when this return statement was called, this return false, our function completely exited. It didn't keep looping over more numbers to find out if 49 was divisible by 8, 9, 10, and so on. It printed this out, and then once our function hit the return statement, completely exited the function, we were done. So let's recap. Biggest takeaways here are that a function is always going to return something, okay? Let me remove these, return, and let's run our function again without the return statements in there and see what happens. Okay, so now I've removed the returns, and let's call like is prime, and we'll do 49 again. So it still prints out our statement that 49 is divisible by 7, and it looks like it's not divisible by anything else either, because it would have continued to loop here and go 8, 9, 10, all the way up until 48. But you'll see that here it didn't return anything. It just returned undefined. So if you don't specify any sort of return, then your function's always just going to return back as undefined. So the second thing to remember is that console.log is not the same thing as a return statement. So console.log is great for printing out, values to test your code and giving you helpful feedback, but it's not a return statement.